And now I have my own company and I develop a solution to support innovative contracting and pricing models.
Ayman.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation to the discussion today. I'm Jaime Espin. I'm professor in health economics. I've been working as advisor to international bodies the last 10 years, mainly in WHO, European Commission, and also regional authorities in Spain.
Thank you, Jaime. Just another check if we have Anusha online now. We know she sees the slides, but there were technical problems with the sound connection, so we are working on solving that. But Anusha obviously is joining us from the side of the payers, being in charge for high-cost medicines and for the East Midlands. So let's go into first some housekeeping rules. Obviously, all of us here in this meeting are representing personal views when we are talking. All participants should be muted. So, but you can ask questions through the questions box. And we had some issues with some people that have no good sound. Stephen, if you could look into that, that would be fine. These questions that you put into the questions box will be using for at the end of the panel to ask questions to the panel and to discuss more in general. So we'll see how much time we will have at a time. Okay, let's first talk about the impact of COVID-19. This type of data about the impact of COVID-19 on economy changes very frequently, almost daily. But it's not changing in the right direction, meaning that it seems to get worse and worse as it moves on. Here on this slide, you see a study from the World Bank where they are looking at how many countries were touched upon by recession in the last over 100 years, 150 years. And you see both the number of countries and you see the width of the recession. You see the famous 30s recession of last century, which is going high and is wide. And you see that the current forecast for the COVID-19 recession is going wider, but shorter. And that's where, of course, the big question mark sits at this moment. How long is this pandemic going to take, and how long will it have an impact on the global economy? Currently, there are lots of predictions. They are all in the range of roughly 2 to 10%, depending on which country you're looking at, how important tourism is for that country, because that's specifically touched, of course, etc. And the current World Bank prospect, the latest one, is a 5.2% contraction in 2020, which means the biggest contraction since the 30s. Well, I think we know all that. But what does it mean? Well, here you see an analysis, and the percentage is a little bit different because this is only done on OECD countries, where you see the last recession, the one of 2008, 2009, where for these countries GDP shrank by around 5.5%, the so-called bank crisis. Now look at the other line also, the brown line is the investments per capita in health. And you see that these actually are also influenced. Not that much as GDP, but the growth of investments in health really went to zero in the years after. And that's a typical thing that we see every time when there is an issue like a recession. Healthcare, and certainly public healthcare, but healthcare in general, is funded by things like social security income, income of the people, tax revenues, etc. And when you get a real economic dump like we have right now, you will expect these to have an impact, to be impacted, and this will be quite quickly on social security, but may take some years before it really hits fully on tax. Stephen, there is a big sound, background sound. Can you see where this is coming from?
Yeah, it's Anusha who's now online, Raf. So Anusha's now with us. That was her joining, so thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I hope you got my explanation shortly. So if I repeat it again without a background noise, after a GDP decrease, you will see, or you should expect, a decrease in investment in health, but with delay. It will be delayed because things like taxes take some time before they are really taken, and so it takes some time before these incomes are there. Whereas the income of the people who, for example, are unemployed, that will hit pretty much immediately. So it means from the recession on forward for several years, we will expect less spending on health and certainly on public health. Now, in 2009, in the bank crisis, there were several studies done where people looked at how were governments handling this lower income of taxes. And right now with COVID-19, this goes hand in hand with higher compensations to try to keep the economy going. So they're also spending more on other stuff, and they have lower income of taxes. So in short, public budgets are coming under great pressure. I don't think this is a secret for anybody. But what they were doing in 2008, 2009 is quite interesting from this study done by the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies, where from all the countries in the European region, you could see that pretty much everybody was reducing investments in hospitals, were reducing the number of health workers, lower payment for health workers. They tried to lower their administrative costs in healthcare, and only at the fourth place we found things like lower prices for drugs and medical devices. Right now, we should not expect this. And you see this in the quote from Mr. Cox in the BMG, that when you speak about heroism, about healthcare workers and the strains on our hospital systems when a pandemic hits, obviously it would be political suicide if you're going to cut costs now in that area. And for example, yesterday, the Belgian government decided to pump another 500 million euro straight into the salaries of the nurses and people working in the hospitals. So which really shows they are not going to cut money there. So they're going to do it somewhere else. And where would that be? Well, this is a short introduction that, yeah, we have asked payers, and there have been some publications on payer surveys. And roughly you see these points coming up when we talk about what could be the impact on pricing. And we'll be talking about access in a minute on another slide. But we thought, let's first look at pricing. Now, dear panel, it's your time now. And I would say, Anusha, if you are online, we love you to get your short intro and then go immediately on these points. Which ones of these do you think will be most impactful on the pharmaceutical business?
Thank you, Raf. So, hi everybody, my name is Anusha Patel and I'm a home care pharmacist covering the East Midlands, but also a high-cost drugs pharmacist. And I work amongst our CCGs locally and for NHS England at a national level. My view on pricing of pharmaceutical products during this period, and possibly for the next 5 to 10 years, if we're looking at the NHS 10-year plan, and moving towards one budget being held by the whole healthcare sector, that we will be not looking solely at the drug acquisition cost, but the impact on a patient not being in the state that we want them in, i.e. remission or in good health. So the impact on mental health, their physical well-being, health and social care will all be a factor that we will take into account. But due to the fact of COVID-19 and block contracting at the moment with all NHS hospitals, we do need a lower price for a medicine because we're not reimbursed directly anymore and for the foreseeable future on the drugs themselves. So if we're not receiving additional income when we increase our activity, for example, having more infusions, we're also then missing out on that. But also, if we're then using more medications, the cost is coming from our budget. So low prices for new entrants is the big one that stands out for me. And also the tendering process in the UK will change, certainly, in response to this.
Yes, and when you think about will change, what would you expect there in that field? So tendering in UK, what would happen?
Yes. So we tend to tender regionally to get scope to ensure that there's plurality in the market to allow for products to be available by all pharmaceutical industry, so to ensure competition. But actually, if we're going to be one model, so we're moving towards integrated care systems, but the plan is to move into an integrated care as one. Across UK, and also Scotland and Wales. Therefore, we may have to tender as the four of us, which would mean much more competitive pricing and unbundling, so a low drug cost without service wraparounds. So, for example, we have lots of pharma-funded packages at the moment that cover delivery costs as well as offering patient support programs. The drive from the NHS is to have that all unbundled, and we just try to obtain the lowest medicine.
Yeah, thank you, Anusha. So Bertrand, what are your thoughts from more the industry side?
Well, there are actually positive news and obviously negative news. The positive one, I think, in all this from your survey, I think one good thing is the delay of the potential pricing reforms in the US. For the ones who are not familiar exactly with what was happening there, CMS, so the organism who's the body who's in charge of Medicare, made an analysis a few years ago, and it went on the desk of Donald Trump, and he said, yeah, it's not normal. We overpay the prices of drugs. The US citizens are overpaying the prices of drugs compared to the people in the rest of the world. We are actually funding the healthcare of the world. And so he decided to implement, or he wanted to implement, an international pricing index, which was a very, very complicated version of what we generally know as external reference pricing or international reference pricing. And that, from my perspective, it's a good thing that's been delayed. But what is interesting is that all the candidates, all the parties were actually advocating for something in that direction. So just to summarize the situation, you had the IPI with the Republicans and Trump. Bernie Sanders on the far left extreme was more like for an IRP inspired from the Canada model. And on the Democrat side, it was more Nancy Pelosi who actually was vocal on the topic. And right now, if I remember well, she was in favor of something like the IPI, but simplified. And again, I don't think it's the purpose here to discuss that, but it was a very, very complicated way to actually align prices in the US to the rest of with the rest of the world. Fundamentally, I don't think the problem is with the prices, especially in the specialty care area, because it's always the same question today. All the questions that we'll be discussing is will it have an impact on the prices of new products? Will it have? It depends actually on the type of products we are discussing. So the discrepancy between the US prices and the rest of the world prices is not always lying with actually the more expensive products. I think the more fundamental healthcare issue in the US is more like the way the business is performed there, with all the in-between actors like the health insurances, the PBMs, and so on. It's the whole model that is not in favor of low prices, with a lot of incentive to actually keep prices high, and especially for products that, from a European perspective, for instance, we consider as commodities. So that's the positive thing is really that all measures have been delayed, and that will have a significant influence on the pharmaceutical industry. More negatively, you listed something like more clawbacks on pharmaceutical turnovers. I definitely think that we see a lot of tax and contributions of all sorts coming back to rescue the endangered healthcare systems in some European countries. In the UK, it would be interesting to have Anusha's perspective on that, but I can definitely see the PPRS being revised at some stage, or anything that will replace the PPRS. So that's definitely going that way. Lower prices for new entrants. So again, as said earlier, it depends. It depends on the product. If the payer sees the value in the product, for the product that really be addressing an unmet need, bringing good value for money, there will always be a budget. There are different ways. It's easier effectively to get some savings on the pharmaceutical spending, but there are other ways than blocking new promising products. You can decide to apply mandatory additional cuts on generics or biosimilars. You can decide on additional price cuts on the branded products that are actually out of patent. You can remove from positive list products that in first place should have never been there. And there are different types of measures that can be taken to actually contain the growth of the pharmaceutical spending, or to even lower the. And what I found very interesting in your graph, in your chart, you were showing actually was interesting to see the offset or the inertia of the impact on the pharmaceuticals, the healthcare spending, sorry, and actually the collapse of the GDP. I'm curious to see how it will go there, but again, there are plenty of it's very complicated because everybody's thinking in terms of my product or my company. It's an industry. There are plenty of things, and what makes me feel optimistic at the moment, the NBI, so the Nasdaq Biotech Index, is actually higher than it has ever been. It's back to the initial level and a little bit higher. It took a massive hit at the beginning of the pandemic, but now it's back to initial level and even slightly higher. So it means that actually the whole financial community is expecting again growth, and growth means actually high prices for drugs. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bertrand. I'll come back to two of the points that you just made, but I would first like to hear also Jaine's ideas about these particular points.
Yes, thank you. Probably I need to make several comments before answer the question that you raised here. The first one is, this crisis is going to be totally different from the previous one, because I think that you explained very well, this will be a global crisis. This is not happened in the last probably 880 years. So this is a very serious financial crisis compared with the previous one, because the previous one affected only to 50% of the countries, and this one is going to affect more than 90% of the countries. This is very relevant. The second issue is this crisis is totally different from the previous one, also because this crisis came for a healthcare system crisis. So we expected that there will be more funding for the healthcare system, because one of the reasons, because in many countries the number of cases was very high, is because the healthcare system was not really prepared. So what we really expecting right now is the payer, the government, are going to introduce or to funding in a better way the healthcare system. This is something that we recommended, it's something that we expected. But I don't expect it that it's going to be so much money for new Me Too product. I expected that most of the new funding will arrive to reform some important area in the healthcare system. I'm speaking about public health, preventive care. I'm speaking about salary of the doctor, nurses, salaries, and so on. So, but at the same time, even there will be some extra funding for the healthcare system, I expected that the government will be more tough in pricing and reimbursement issue, and probably would be priorities only for the new medicine that are providing any good therapeutical value. As I commented before, it's not going to focus so much in the another statin or another first-line colorectal cancer, where we have so many right now in the market, generic, with a very good competitive market. So in the previous crisis, we see that the money was less for the healthcare system. Right now, we expected that in order to prevent the second wave of the COVID-19, probably more funding will be put in the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. The third important issue is related to the US. I think it was commented very well by Bertrand. We know very well that Donald Trump was interested in introduce international reference pricing in the US. We know, we are working right now in a model that the international reference price introduced in the US, we have a very strong influence in the price around the world, especially in Europe. So right now, we don't know what happened, but probably it will be some delay in this kind of US price reform, but probably it would be just a short-term delay. I mean, US government are always complaining that European payers are free rider. I must say I disagree with this statement, but this is a typical statement from the US, and they say it's a free rider, we overpay, and so on. So doesn't matter that it's going to be right now by Donald Trump. In the next 4 or 5 years, probably US is going to make a pricing reform, and this price reform is going to have some influence in these European prices. So just as a summary, 3 main ideas. The first one is this crisis is totally different from the previous one. More funding for the healthcare system is expected. The second comment is this extra funding, I don't expect that it's going to be for new medicine. I expect it's going to be more for preventive care, public health system, salary of the doctor, and so on. And the last issue will be US. I mean, just probably would be known right now, but in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we are going to have a very strong US pricing reform, and this is going to have a very strong influence in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. Now, I'm going to pick on one point that you both mentioned, actually. What we see many times is when a breakthrough product is launched, that the time between the first launch of a new mechanism of action that seems to be very efficient and the second one that enters in that area is getting shorter and shorter. That's a general point that we see in many areas, and we know that almost like there'll be many products launching in this group, there'll be many products launching in that group, etc. It's a continuous attention point. Now, I mean, you said Me Too products would not get a good price, and but now you also said something about maybe not the second or third. What does it mean? We see currently the business as usual was if you were the second one and you were short after the first one, you got in many countries almost the same price, maybe a little bit of maybe a little bit more depending how your profile looked, but that was it. And then the third one might get a little bit lower price again. Some countries did this more structurized when there was a larger time in between. They had a bigger price cut for the third one. And when it was closer by, it was a smaller or no price cut. What would we expect now? Would we now expect that they really are going to be more harsh on these second and third entrants?
I don't know if I can answer the first one, but I can do it right now. What I really expect is a much more simple assessment. So, I mean, it's good to introduce the second one. It's good to introduce the third one. Similar efficacy, similar price. So let's keep the market working in a competitive way. So what is really have not seen is the second one, similar efficacy, and requires a 10% premium price. The third one, similar efficacy, requires 50% extra price because, I don't know, some issue. We don't make the competitive market. So what I really expected is the second and the third and the fourth one will be also welcome, but only with the same price in order just to increase competition. There is no any other way. If the second one and the third one is so similar even in the mechanism of action, probably we don't need a full assessment like 9 months, people working in a full HTA, where we know that the comparator was the same, the efficacy is almost the same, the endpoint is almost the same. So let's make much more easier this assessment. Let's try to compete by price and know if you don't have any additional therapeutical value.
Thank you. Bertrand?
Yeah, I think it makes perfectly sense here, because when you launch a drug, there's the good old system of the 80s, everybody was thinking in terms of market share. Now what is important is to have a budget share. So your biggest opponent is not always actually the Me Too, but it's more like you are competing against other health priorities to get access to a fraction of the budget. Here, exactly what said Rem, if you have exactly the same indication, targeting the same population with similar results, well, I don't see the point of giving you can give a different price to lower your budget impact, but at the end, it's budget neutral because you don't add, it's not like if you were adding lines of treatment, but if you give exactly the same indication, yeah, let the market do its job and let's have the the best salespeople promoting their product. But yeah, we'd be tempted to agree with that.
Well, Anusha, I think we are curious what you think about this. Certainly when you look at the high-cost drugs.
Yes, I think a speedier process to allow drugs quicker access is definitely required. And particularly in the UK with the pause with NICE in reviewing some of these current submissions, they've managed to turn them around quite quickly. And I suspect this new process will be here to stay. In terms of a pathway, so if we're looking at high-cost medicines and there's a new medicine with a drug that's quite in comparison to it's similar across all endpoints, efficacy, safety measures, then it simply is about the price. And it's a really hard, blunt message to put out there. But ultimately, without any additional benefit or outcome or value to the patient, we would simply use the most cost-effective, particularly in the era that we are in with biosimilars coming into the market in the next 10 years, but also our experience in the last 5 years. And we've had a real high uptake of biosimilars in the UK with really good outcomes.
Okay, thank you. And let me go to the second part where we were wondering about, and it's more the access part. And here you see, again, a number of points that were mentioned already, like we had seen in the 2008-2009 recession that the weight indicator of FPA indeed showed that there were several months extra before a product got access to the market. So, Obviously, one would expect that people will be thinking about cost containment and being sure that they control their budget, and more generics biosimilars is a yell that we hear from everybody in that payer or close to payers as what will be coming. And multi-sourcing is another thing, the supply chain security, outcomes-based agreements about capitation and so on. These are the ones that are suggested. I would into our panel, which ones of these would you think will be most impactful, where we should put most attention to? And I would say, Anusha, as your line was really great right now, so please, I'll give you the word first.
Thank you. So I've already mentioned generics and biosimilars. That's a key player at the moment. And I think utilising more outcome-based agreements are seen to be more acceptable during this time, particularly if we can reduce the year one costs when we have loading doses, for example, that ramp up the cost quite massively. We're also moving away from just looking at per annum costs, and we're looking a lot broader. So maybe a 5-year budget impact model with an outcome-based agreement on top of that would be quite attractive for us. In terms of capping of individual drug budgets, I suspect that won't really be a problem for us, because we now own our budget as one, and with PBR not happening at the moment, we are in control of what we prescribe, and actually we would want to make sure we are using the most cost-effective product. In terms of possibly the access of timeliness and speeding up access for innovative medicines, we really do require real-world evidence, and we do follow SWEEP a lot in the UK. So if one trust is quite innovative, we do go to them to ask them for their input and their experience, as opposed to looking at possibly clinical trial data. And so real-world evidence submissions would be really useful.
Okay, yeah. So Bertrand?
Well, there are 3 of these items that I would actually put together, because for me they are all related. Let's say the more restrictions for new entrants, stricter criteria for starting and stopping treatment. That will be probably reinforced by the current environment and situation. And that completes actually more outcome. It's more in favor of outcome-based agreements and capping, various types of capping at patient level. But I think that is, let's say that the pandemic is just it's just adding an additional nail on the topic. It's something that was anyway in the move for years now, for various reasons. Because first of all, we have this new generation of products, so the one-off therapies, ATMPs, so including gene therapies and so on. So they require new pricing models because you don't have enough data today to actually sustain the claim that you really stabilize the patient for 10 years, 20 years. You only have 2 or 3 years of data. But such an improvement on the quality of life for patients, moving from one injection or one series of injection compared to especially in pediatric usage, one injection every quarter, for instance. So that's very like breakthrough. No question around that. But besides, even in the old world of pharma, the chronic treatment approach, the products become so more and more increasingly specialized with various indications, various subpopulations, subgroups, mutations, with different levels of value, because in the eyes of the payer, and I'm speaking under the control of 2 payers here, for them, they don't have the same level of need in all those indications. And so generally the way it was addressed was to do a weighted average of all these cost effectiveness prices or whatever relevant prices level would have been for the various indications. Now the industry is actually saying, oh, I would like to really capture the value by indication. So indication-based pricing is something that's really become a hard topic, and especially with some products where you have very, very high value addressing a high unmet need in a tiny population of a few dozens of patients or hundreds of patients. And besides, you could actually address the need of patients that are already in control of their disease with cheaper therapies. So all the environment was already set for promoting outcome-based agreements and capping on individual drug budgets. Especially when you mention this capping on individual drug budgets, I think of the cost per patient. I'm thinking of either you think in terms of duration of treatment. So you say, well, I'm fine. I can actually provide a budget to pay for 1 year or 1.5 years of treatment for this patient. If the patient is still treated beyond that point, like to maybe you, pharmaceutical company, to provide me a discount. But on the other side, I'm also thinking of, there have been a trend in the last years, and again, it would be interesting to have the English perspective on that. There were all these points about the pediatric drugs that were launched. I'm thinking of drugs in cystic fibrosis. I'm thinking of drugs in Duchenne. With treatments that actually the cost is increasing with the weight of the patient. So as you can imagine, in pediatric usage, when you start to treat a child, 2 years later, the cost of treatment will be multiplied by 1.5, 1.8, or 2 because the weight would have increased, hopefully. So all these elements were already there. I think it's just the current environment, the current situation is just adding one additional stone to this wall.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll be coming back to that point on weight-based cost, but first would like to hear Jaime.
Yes, thank you. Probably I can, in this case, I can highlight 4 important points. The first one is related to the delay. You know, this case of a weight indicator by SPR. We know that it's a little bit tricky because we can see here the delay from European Medicines Agency approval until pricing and reimbursement. So this is what we can see here. But never we can see when the manufacturer apply for pricing and reimbursement. And we know that pharma company used to apply very soon in high price country and normally used to apply later in country with a low price. So I must say that we need to see this kind of delay indicator very carefully, because normally it's not just just the delay as delay, it's just some kind of pricing strategy for pharma companies. So saying that, of course, we are expecting some delay. We know that in some countries, the pricing committee did not meet in the last few weeks due to the lockdown. So for sure, we can expect some delay in approval, especially in the next 3 or 4 months. So we are waiting that, but please don't compare with this kind of FPI indicator that normally is comparing not the full data. The second one about the budget cap and so on. Yes, for sure. We are really expecting that the country are really happy to introduce more budget cap. Probably the one that are used at the global level. I think in this one that is linked with the increase of the GDP, the one that is in France, the one that is in Belgium, in Spain, where the extra pharmaceutical expenditure is going to be linked to the extra GDP, and we know that it's not going to be extra GDP, so we're expecting this kind of relationship. So I expected that many countries are going to make this kind of link. The third one is, yes, for sure, it's going to be extra money for medicines, but most of this money is going to go to COVID-19 therapies, COVID-19 vaccines. So again, I not want to say that it's going to change. It's going to change in the funding priority. Oncology is going to be always a priority, but if something is coming to the market with a very high efficacy for COVID-19, for sure this is going to be the priority. My last comment, I totally agree with Bertrand related to, my impression is we are going to move from so many outcome-based agreements that we have many in the last few years, just a few assessments, because we know that it's very complex, the implementation, that we know it's very complex, the assessment. Probably we are going to move to indication-based pricing. So in this case, when we have indication-based pricing, we don't need assessment later. So we have one product, two indications, one price for one indication, second price for second indication. We invoice the price according with the indication. Everything would be very easy. Outcome-based agreement have been a nice story during the last few years. Many of them have been implemented, just a few of them have been assessed. So probably in the next 3 or 4 years, we are going to move more to indication-based pricing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. So, which I assume we'll write instead of the other indication-based pricing. Anusha, you got a question on weight-based pricing, especially with products that are started in for lifelong therapy in children at high prices, and they get more and more expensive as the children get older. How would that need to be managed, and how is it managed right now? Because it's already there, obviously.
I don't have actual first-hand experience on those types of scenarios with children, but are only in adults. And it would be to just ensure equity, that if patients are of a weight and a dose change is required, that the price is comparable. And those are some of the schemes that we have and do utilise.
Okay, yeah. So I think many people are wondering about the next point, which is, okay, all good and well. Now we know what's going to happen with pricing, with access, what we may expect, but what does it mean for our job? So, and that's really, so what should people that work in market access strategies and pricing do differently, if anything? So short term, long term, and of course, excluding the fact that we can't see each other and meet each other, etc. Strictly on business. So let's take first on the short term. Maybe Anusha, would you like to start?
Yeah, so to pick up on your point that we can't meet, actually engaging virtually via an electric platform is now very acceptable, and most of us have access, and we've been doing this now to engage back with the pharmaceutical industry. So succinct budget impact models, but over a longer period, taking into account the fact that we want to keep our patients at home. So adding in costs associated with patients coming into the hospital, as well as the benefits of reducing the capacity on our heavily burdened IV infusion suites at the moment, is something to think about. And also long term, with the fact that we've now been forced to keep people at home, we've really relied heavily on new models of supply of our medicines, particularly the use of home care, delivering medicines. We've got NHS volunteers delivering medicines to people in their home, and we've got a charity fund that covers the costs of the fuel, but also additional things that may have come from that. And therefore, understanding that actually there will be more emphasis on keeping people at home, which is what we've been trying to do for many years. So it's really raised the game in terms of the home care market in the UK. And as a home care lead for a region, it's been really positive for people to really understand the work that our home care providers do to keep these people at home, and actually that their nurses are treating NHS patients. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Jaime, also from the payer side, what do you think?
Okay, I think that right now pharma company need to thinking that the current situation is not a normal situation. I mean, it's not usual to have this kind of pandemic, so pharma company need to adapt it. And probably all the pharma company have many products in the portfolio. My recommendation is, at least in the short term, just focusing the one that have higher therapeutical value. I mean, in the next 2-3 years, it could be not a lot of money to funding Me Too, or to funding, again, another statin or another first-line colorectal cancer. So try to focus just in the one that they have therapeutical value. In the long term, I'm very optimistic always, so I'm thinking that probably next year, at the end of December next year, everything will be much more better, probably better medicine for COVID-19, probably some vaccine with very good efficacy. So in 2022, probably the situation will be much more normal right now. So when I wanted to require some kind of patient to pharma company to make more conscious about the situation right now, to give priority about the disease that we have right now. I mean, for example, the people that are making the assessment right now, most of them are working normally after lockdown, so making the same assessment. But you know that right now the situation is very complex due to the COVID-19 priorities. So again, probably would be not so many people at the same time right now making assessment. So again, my recommendation to pharma companies is make priorities inside the company, and when they apply for pricing and reimbursement, apply for the one that really knows that are the one with higher therapeutical value.
Yeah, there's a clear standpoint that we hear from payer side. Bertrand, are you thinking that's what we are going to?
Well, I will echo what Anusha said regarding the, and from a broader perspective, that will have consequences on the way pharmaceutical companies are engaging with prescribers, so HCPs, and subnational payers, subnational level payers. So in a model where you don't have to meet people face to face anymore, well, I'm not saying that you don't need to meet them, but you cannot meet them face to face in flesh. So in this case, well, that will have obviously consequences on the headcounts of the companies, because when you have people who were spending their life on the road to move from one hospital or one province to whatever, now everything can be, you can chain 5, 6, 8, 10 meetings on your computer or on your phone every day. I'm not saying that it's better for the mental health of the people who will do that, but that will have consequences. Now, if we focus on the organization of the access and pricing function, I have no assertion on the topic. I like you, I don't have a crystal ball. I more have questions. I wonder if at some stage we will not move from the ultra specialization way where we have the access people working on value messages and positioning the product. It's a bit like marketing side versus the pricing people. So there's the pricing, so you have to make the distinction between strategic pricing and operational pricing. And besides the health economists that are sometimes looked at like the nerds of the group because they are doing like fancy models and everything, so no one's understands exactly what they do. But it's a mandatory step, and it's actually something very tangible. So I just wonder if at one stage we'll not move to more generalist profiles, and maybe being more like not being specialized in one process, but being a little bit more specialized in one therapeutic area, because they have different priorities, different needs, and you have, from my perspective, you need to have a holistic approach of your environment. It's not only about the subgroups, the subpopulations, and the value for each subpopulations, and on the other side, the price that you can achieve. You have to have all of that in mind at the same time. You have to be a little bit like a conductor, a director of the situation.
So before we see if there are questions from the audience, Bertrand, what should we tell our bosses in the companies? about all this, saying, "Oh, sorry, but you should really delay this product because it's a Me Too." It doesn't seem to fly all the time. So how would you do that?
First of all, if you do that, I think you have to update your resume. No one wants to do that. When you are close to the launch, it's already too late. So much money has been invested in the asset. Now, the hard message internally is really to bring reasonable pricing in the mindset. Sometimes the price expectations are totally disconnected from any reality, and it's bad for the reputation of the industry. And it's not because you manage to launch let's take the example of the US. Not because you can launch a product at whatever price in the US that you can achieve the same in Europe, because the mechanisms are not the same, the chain of discount is not the same. There are plenty of differences. We live in two different worlds, two different healthcare systems. But again, I will avoid to to anyone to go to see their boss and say 6 months before launch, no, we should delay.
Okay.
No, but more seriously, it's always better to have a slightly lower price and book sales than, because the volumes that you don't sell today, you will never sell them. In the meantime, your patent is running. Okay, so the sales you don't do today, you will not catch up on them. And it's not because you will manage to negotiate 10%. You can easily make the break-even point. How much delay can you actually absorb to compensate a 10% price deviation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think if you did pricing research for a product you're going to launch in a few months from now, and you did that before COVID, so the end of last year, would you do it again?
No, I think I will not change anything. Again, I want to stick to this point. If the drug is really good, payers will find a budget. If it corresponds to something that is really needed, if you're in a space, but if you are if you operate in a space where payers already have a broad arsenal of therapeutic options, of course you're not in a good situation. But if you come with something very new, with an amazing data set with you, it's good. I mean, the first mission of payers is to bring innovation to the market and make sure that the population, they operate under the mandate of their respective governments. So, and one of the prerogatives of the governments are actually to provide to guarantee the good health of their people. So that's.
Okay, thank you. So we are at the end of our webinar already. So I would like to thank the panel for your input. It was I learned a few points today, so I assume everybody did. We might have a few questions. As we are waiting for questions, is there any final words that you would like to add? Anusha, for example?
Yeah, so I think my key points are quite similar to what's just been said. So reasonable pricing, and as long as the medicine's highly efficacious and it's got a good safety profile, the reasonable pricing is what makes the difference. So the outcome-based agreement on top of that is also useful, but the price initially is key. And when we have an outcome-based agreement launched following an actual PAS price, we see that as maybe you got it wrong, and that's why you've put this additional price on top, because as we would know that the access or the uptake wasn't what you were expecting. So the right price right from the start will make that huge difference in getting the numbers, and therefore then provides us with that real world evidence that we need moving forward.
Thank you. Jaime, some last words from you?
No, I don't have any additional comments. I mean, the issue right now is there is another uncertainty about what is going to happen. We are waiting probably a second wave. So for sure, there is no second wave of COVID-19. The situation will be much more better. in 2021. But if in October, November we have a second wave, we expected much more crisis. So there's a lot of uncertainty. So we need to see very cautious with all the projection of what is going to happen.
Yes. Let's cross our fingers. Bertrand, any last word?
Well, as much as I'm really in favor of all the outcome-based agreements and any type of innovative pricing models, I think that will require a huge transformation on the payer side. And the question is how payers and the industry can work together on that. And it's a very complicated topic because, and again, there's no judgment in what I'm saying, but each pharmaceutical company has their own agenda because they have their product, and their product comes with its load of challenges. So some will actually be pushing for indication-based pricing, some will be pushing more like for outcome-based type of agreements, and it sends very, very contradictory messages to the payers, and I wonder how actually, yes, the payers and also the HCPs, never forget the healthcare professionals have been very under pressure for the last months, but all these new pricing mechanisms, they require an extra additional administrative workload on their side. And this is where I wonder how the transition will actually happen. Because again, if you come with this type of agreements, what's happening with the gene therapies at the moment is very interesting. But if you're the first one, it's okay. But if you're the second or the third one to come, then if it's always the same people who have to put the data in the registries, that will become a different story.
Okay. Thank you, Bertrand. So, Stephen, would you like to finish the meeting? And I thank everybody again and give the word to Stephen.
Yeah, I'd like to thank our panel today. It's been a wonderful discussion. Unfortunately, we've not got many time for questions because the discussion's been so great, and thank you, panel. Just to alert you to the upcoming webinars in the Expert Insights series. So they're on screen now. So we've got a few upcoming throughout July, August, and September. To sign up to those, if you click on the link that's on your screen now, you can do that. And please follow us on LinkedIn for any more updates about that. But again, just to say thank you to all for participating, particularly the panel members, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.